You know what? I was thinking the other day. Do you remember that time when I was just swinging in the backyard and you pull up in your fast car whistling my name? Then you open up a beer and say, "Get over here, play a video game."
I do remember that.
The latest pop culture news with your hosts, James and Matt. Welcome to This Week in Metropolis.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of This Week in Metropolis with me, James, and him over there, Matt. And this week we're joined by George Degenkamp. George, how are you?
Good. And you got the last name right. That's.
I was really.
You could see the concentration on his face.
Yeah, that one sums maybe like 2 out of 3. So,
I just want to point out to all the viewers and the listeners who suffered watching last week's one, where I slowly deteriorated with my consumption of whiskey followed by beer. This week is going to be a clean episode. There is no alcoholic beverage next to me. Not that I'm aware of, but full concentration this week and shouldn't be. So that shouldn't have impacted on my pronunciation of your name. But thank you, George, joining us all the way this evening from Toronto in Canada, which is, like we were just talking before we came on air, lovely place. Been there myself, absolutely love it. Tell the viewers and the listeners who you are, what you do, and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So probably primary reason I'm here is we make games. I'm part of a small studio based out of Toronto, all remote, but we're all local. And we make small indie games. And we don't really stick to any type of game. I mean, some studios have their, platformer or, their specific angle. But we sort of try to make experimental things or things we wanted to see in a niche that doesn't exist yet, or topics like that. So I'm a technical director at this small studio called Mighty L, based in Toronto.
And what does just for the uninitiated like myself, what role does a technical director play in the whole process?
So it varies a little bit by team size. So maybe in a larger studio, of 100 to 1,000 people, you're talking more of like a manager role or management, sort of overseeing the systems design of like how a game is going to be laid out behind the scenes, and managing programmers. For me, because our team scales from about 1 to 3 programmers max, including myself, a lot of that is just doing the programming myself. So it's in the back end. It's setting up the systems. It's figuring out like, okay, if our game's going to be very dialogue heavy, like what sort of systems do we want to set up that present the dialogue to the players, that let our writers write that dialogue, things like that. So for me, it's a lot of making tools. It's a lot of making the actual gameplay on the programming side, and now it's a little bit of management because now I've got some help on the programming front. So.
What's your background, George? How did you get into where you're at now? Was you part of the startup of Mighty L, or did you join it at a later date? What's your background?
Yeah, I was. So Mighty L is run by a guy named Dave Proctor, and he and I both went to the same college in the area. Both of us had come from different fields before. I was at a university trying to figure out. I knew I wanted to make games, but it was like, do I want to be an artist? Do I want to be a programmer? I don't even know. As long as it's game centric, throw me in there.
Yeah.
So I ended up going to this college for a programming course, and Dave went into it for a design role. And just the way the program was set up, they sort of mash you all together and say, okay, make games together. And we hit it off there, and then we sort of went our own separate ways with different studios for a little bit, and realized that's not what we wanted to do long term, or it was fun, but we wanted to try something new. And so Dave poached me away, and no, he had been talking about this for a while, and we decided, let's try this out. Let's try making something really small and see where it goes. And that's where the Big Con started up from.
Which is interesting. Sort of you describing the big con as something really small, and I think it's like for me. I remember seeing the very first sort of previews of it and so on, and just my initial reaction was like, "Wow, that's really cool." Because it for me it ticked the nostalgia box from a point of view, as it looks like a game that could quite easily be on the the SNES or sort of 16-bit sort of consoles, but also the from the 90s sort of references and so on, as I would sort of was a teenager in the 90s and so on, so I've got a lot of affiliation with that. But you describe it as really small, but for me it seemed like it was received very well, and it, the press and so on, it felt like a big sort of game to me as an outsider, seeing how it was received as such. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think so. When I'm on this team, like my brain is always in the tech centric side. So it's Dave will look into marketing, and then we have people for art and people for sound and all across the whole sort of spectrum there. But for me, yeah, it always starts out, okay, like here's a simple idea. This sounds like a pretty contained idea that we could maybe put together a quick prototype in a couple of weeks, and then hammer out some details and things like that. I mean, of course, after those few weeks are over, it turns out you've made a behemoth of a project, and you have all these other ideas you want to try out, and all these other mechanics and fun things you want to throw in, and then then the project ends up blooming into what it did with the big con. But it starts out usually as like, okay, we want to. I think with Dave, it was like, okay, I want to make a game about a road trip set in the 90s where you're trying to save a video store, and that was sort of like the kernel of it. And then from there, it did grow into something quite big.
It's such a unique concept, I think, as a story as well, and the fact that and the way that you're trying to save your mum's video store is the fact that you learn how to be a pickpocket, and that's it's this great moral sort of, well, I'm doing the right thing, but through crime across the country as such, which I think was brilliant. Did you? Wait, what interests me? Did you, when you was referencing the 90s, because there was a lot of 90s references in there, how did you filter that list down? Was it a brainstorming session of, oh, we need to do this, we need to do this?
It was brainstorming, but it was also just a flurry. I think everybody on the team was just so excited to bring up all these 90s nostalgic icons. And one thing that was really interesting is that we had sort of a full gamut of, like, some members of the team were teenagers in the 90s. I was born in 1990. So for me, it was like, kids' cartoons and Furbies and things like that. And then we had some younger people on our team too that really don't remember the 90s. But if you've been online, I mean, you've seen the 90s nostalgia just sort of cycle through. I mean, Pokemon's still part of the Zeitgeist and everything. So so it was a sort of cool mix of, like, okay, what's this rose-colored version of 90s that some people know now? What is, like, this old version that some of us remember as kids? And, like, what's the rock music that was cool? And it just became like this mash of, like, how many cool things from the 90s, or how many ideas can we sort of, like, fit and cram into this thing before we close the door on it.
And you know what? Just saying that, George, there, you've just, I think that's such a clever way of trying to implement certain things within the game, because I watched and done a review over the weekend. I watched the film Air, which obviously has I mean, that's based on the 80s, essentially, of Nike bringing out the Air Jordans and things like that. And as good as the film was, one of the things that stood out to me was the music. Matt, you've seen the film. I'm sure you agree. The music, you just mentioned it there, George, about the music and the rock music references and things like that. And the kind of, there was certain kind of set props and things like that just stood out to me as setting the scene. And I think it's the same. If you can get the right kind of little touches to it that just emphasize the scene that you're trying to set as such, and the same within a game, just goes such a long way. They're the bits that you go, love that.
It creates that world.
Yeah.
I think one thing sort of neat to mention too is one of our sort of big influences on like how to present nostalgia was Stranger Things, because they have a great example of like, okay, they're set in the 80s, they represent the 80s, but it's not exactly the 80s. It's more of this shiny version of the 80s that you look at it and you go, oh, like this, it's like a remaster almost of the 80s feeling. So it was a lot of that too. It was a lot of like, how do we sort of present this where like, even if you weren't in the 90s, or even if you just sort of tangentially know a lot of these references, how do we make that feel like that special feeling? Like, oh man, that's something that feels 90s.
Yeah, which and not. I talked recently about Top Gun Maverick, because James loved Top Gun Maverick and I didn't particularly. And what I didn't like about that was it was forced nostalgia, is the way I would describe it. It's like, look at this thing. Do you remember when this thing happened? Look. And whereas I think where Stranger Things is successful is that they do that to a certain extent with, and like, was it beginning of season 2 when they're dressed up as Ghostbusters? Maybe I think it's maybe season 2, where it's obvious that they're showing you this thing, but also in the background there are also little touches of stuff that you think, oh wow, that's I remember that, or whatever. It's creating that world, isn't it? And I think the Big Con does that with the I can't remember, is it Burbo is the Furby?
We have Burbos, we have cans of Horm.
Horm, Spam. That would have been, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and then just a whole sort of slew of these almost references.
Yeah,
nice. I just want to just quickly, Matt. I just want to say, because we've got a few people that are watching along at the moment, so just say a bit of a hello. And if you've got any questions for George, by the way, please get them in, and we'll be happy to ask. And if you're a keen gamer, do go and check out Mighty Yell's games, and we'll venture on to other games as well in a bit. But we've got with us this evening Highland G's with us. Hey guys, Highland G will be joining us next week, I believe. We'll get that confirmed. I'm not drinking. And we've got Shane from Dawn of Comics. Happy Tuesday, gents. Happy Tuesday to you as well, Shane. And I did pop it up, but the Mighty Yell Studios are watching. We love wholesome crime at Mighty Yell. And we've also got James T. Keegan. Hey-o. James is in the house. Thanks for joining. Again, if you've got any questions, get them in. But back to you, Matt.
I just wanted to say, the reason I disappeared and came back, because there was one thing that I meant to put on specifically for this show, which is something that the Big Con did actually influence me buying, which is a
lanyard.
And it's an original Blockbuster Video lanyard that I acquired, and cost me far too much money, I'd like to admit, for a lanyard, particularly because I had to ship it from America. But it's an authentic one that they would have worn in the stores.
But Matt, I was just going to say, I remember, because we were saying just before we came live, I remember the episode when you talked about the Big Con, which probably wasn't a live episode at the time. It was probably way back when we weren't doing lives. And we posted, or I certainly posted your review that you'd done of the game. What are your memories? I don't know if it's a game you go back to and play now, but what were your kind of overall thoughts on the game when you played it?
I just loved the fact it was so different, and I've spoke about it before that I've always been a gamer in the past, but now it's the case that I don't know, there's a certain element of fatigue with the type of games, and this can make me sound old. The type of games that are being made aren't necessarily games that relate to me as such. For as much as I enjoy playing Minecraft now and again with my boys, or sort of Fortnite now and again, or whatever it may be, there's none that tell a story that interests me particularly now, or one like we was talking about with the nostalgia thing. I loved playing it, and it's got a feel of, which I'm sure was intentional, like a feel of like the Doug cartoon, for example. It's got an element of that. It's got the way you can explore, and you can do the side quests with the pawnbroker and collect, I can't remember what the first one is. It was things like a corn, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, there was a whole town. Yeah, the corn.
And you can do that. you can steal some sneakers to sell to this collector, and just all of that stuff together. And it had a great twist at the end as well. I quite liked that. It's one of the very few games that I played and then thought, I want to play that again. I want to, sort of get back into that world again, because it did feel like you were in a world as such that you bought into because of the characters and so on. Yeah.
One of my complaints with certain games, even going to more recent ones like Gears of War and games like that, is because it is a bit copy and paste at times. You go to a wall, you duck down, you shoot someone, you duck down, you go and do the next bit. It's a bit repetitive. As visually stunning as it is, it's a bit, you just get into a bit of a routine.
Style over substance.
It's a bit muscle memory-esque. Question for you, George, is how do you, in the creation of these games and the ideas that are flowing between you and the team, how do you get to a point where you go, you don't fall into that trap as such?
Yeah, well, this is something we actually talk about a lot, because I think it's actually a bit of a natural divergence between, say, us and a team of thousands of developers. And I think I sympathize with their problem in a lot of ways, because they have all these people that are relying on the next game for a paycheck, and the studio has to grow, and they have all these responsibilities where a lot of the fans know them as the Gears of War studio or things like that. So for them to do something like pivot to something that's maybe non-combat based, or not Gears of War next, that's a pretty titanic shift for a company like that to make. And because of that, their strength is that they're making the same sort of system over and over again, so they can really polish it. With thousands of people and multiple iterations and years of the same sort of games, they can bring those games to a level that for us indies is very hard to sort of match in terms of production quality. So our strength sort of is on the other side, where they can't pivot, we can. I mean, if we have 4 or 5 people, the risk of a failure is much smaller. Our burn rate is like a joke compared to how big, if you have 1,000 or 2,000 people on staff. But yeah, the benefit of that is that we get to sort of try all the crazy cool ideas that maybe are a little too risky for Ubisoft or another AAA to take on. And then because you're trying something new, you don't necessarily have to go in with as much polish, because I mean, in our case too, we're not that polish is not important to us, to be clear, but you're not there's not 10,000 90s themed movie sort of movie referencing these games in the same sort of field for other people to go, oh well, yeah, but why would I play this one when there's 30 other ones that came out? So yeah, we get to sort of bring something new and fresh to the table, and that's our strength as a smaller studio. So I think that's sort of where it differs.
Which brings us on really to A Night in the Attic, which for me, I guess it's like that. To compare it to music, it's like that second album, isn't it? You can either think, oh well, I'm going to do another 90s themed game, but set in I don't know, whatever it may be, instead of a video shop. But I'm following what you do in After BigCon and what it's very much a left turn in terms of a VR game that's based on Knights in the Round Table, sort of as a theme. Where how did you get there?
So that project actually started as a bit of just like a game jam, which is like sort of jamming on your own, coming up with weird ideas outside of the company, between myself and who later became the art director, Andrea. And we just wanted to make something simple to test it out. It wasn't VR, it wasn't anything. It was just this idea of those old marble maze tilting games that you used to play with. And I was like, okay, let's just put something together there. We had this sort of idea of like, oh, you roll off the side of that marble maze. And I mean, this is where that sort of cool aspect of indies comes in, is because Dave's company, Mighty Yell, or where I work, was sort of looking for what to do next and feeling things out. And things sort of lined up where it was like, okay, what if we took this and just poured gasoline on it and just made it this big thing. And make it, see if we can do VR, see if we can do like a full 3D sort of story campaign in it. And that's not, I mean, we did 2D art in the first game, and now we're switching to 3D. We did a non-VR game, then we're switching to VR. The first game was story-centric, like dialogue, and now we're going much more like a tilting platformer where, like all the skills change sort of upside down, and it's something a bigger team just couldn't risk. But for us, it was just fun. It was like getting the chance to sort of throw out the rundown and try something completely new. And I think we're probably going to do that with the next project too, because it's just too fun to keep switching it up.
I love the way you talk about that, George, in the sense that because, like you say, you probably haven't got the overheads and the kind of risk factor as much, that you can just throw in an idea and go, why don't we try this? Like you said, just as simple as going, let's make it VR, and the fact that gaming is evolving in so many different ways, the fact that you can go into that as a smaller indie company. And I think, Matt, I know you're a massive advocate of indie games, certainly on kind of PC gaming and things like that. So how does you mentioned about VR there? It wouldn't have even been a thing that crossed my mind. But how does that what's the jump like to go and create a VR game?
Which I guess that falls in your lap in terms of your job role. If it's VR, right, George? Sort this out. How we
Come on,
going to actually do this?
Yeah, and it is a lot of that. It's sort of like, okay, well, I mean, this sort of works on a regular screen right now. It's a bit slow, and it's a bit like sort of held together with duct tape because we didn't think it was going to be a big game at first, and or like a big project with a team and all that. So a lot of it was just like, how do we even get this thing running on a thing you strap to your face, right? And that was honestly a terrifying challenge for I won't sugarcoat that one. It was running something on like a high-end gaming PC is one thing, but once we started working with an Oculus, it's like a cell phone on your face with two high-definition screens that both have to render the game. It was insane, and we spent a lot of time sort of scrambling, seeing if we could get a little bit of help from people that had experience in this, and thankfully we came across a programmer who was just absurdly talented with this this specific sort of the issue, and had worked on it before, and some black magic came out of that, and we managed to pull it off. But yeah, it was a shift completely in the way you work and the way you think. I mean, now you're not looking at a screen when you work; you're holding a headset sort of balanced on your head while you're typing, and then you jump back in. Yeah, so it's.
I was going to say, I mean, you mentioned, we've discussed it a couple of times, although you haven't necessarily got the risks, what are the biggest challenges, would you say, that you've had? And that might have been with the big con, it might be with a night in the attic. What have been the biggest challenges as an indie gaming studio?
So, I mean, there's general challenges, which I think is just trying to set yourself apart, because like we talk about it a lot, where the number of indie games that come out now is just, it's crazy. Like it's, I mean, you could get buried in a day under another 10 or 20 releases. And that's, you're lucky if those are just small studios. Some of them are AA, some of them are, they had a name before. But I think Dave has like a real talent for sort of picking out something that's going to stick out a little more, and making sure we're in a position where, maybe we get a good spot to release, or we get, a good sort of spotlight, things like that. So a lot of that, I'm thankful that he sort of, it's offloaded onto him, and I don't have to worry about things like that as the tech director. But on my end, I'd say within the studio, our personal sort of experience in this company was a lot of just sort of hammering out which roles were which. And that's, I mean, you're going to get this with a small team. You're all wearing different hats. You're doing jobs that wouldn't really fit under your purview as a bigger studio, but I mean, they got to get done. And just sort of figuring out where those lines are. Like sometimes it's creative differences, or sometimes it's, like you don't know when to push back, or like this is going to be way too complicated to pull off. And like, I want to say yes to every crazy idea Dave comes up with, and that has shot us in the foot before. Whereas like it's my job to say like, no, we have a tech budget. This is what's going to happen, and this is what we can pull off, and then we can polish that and do all sorts of fun stuff with that. But so I think con was a bit of a growing pain in that regard. But I think by the end of the project, we really started to get a hang of or like a rhythm of that.
Yeah.
And that carried over to the next project, was just way smoother, like in terms of roles, in terms of sort of the pipeline. And yeah, you could tell, like going from one project to the next, it was like, okay, we really got a handle on this now. And that was relieving. That was a good feeling.
Are there any, from this is a personal question for yourself, really, are there any games in your mind, sort of when you think about, oh, I'd quite like to do that? What's your, like a unicorn as such? I want to do a game that is this.
Yeah.
Have you got one of those?
I don't know. I'm the one, I like, you know, as out there as some of our ideas end up being, like the last two projects. There's somebody in the comments already, don't unleash me. I've been looking at stuff like Blaseball, like these weird sort of games that nobody actually plays. They play
What's
themselves.
Blaseball?
Blaseball. So James, you might be interested in this if you're interested in the sort of like sports management. Unfortunately, they shut down recently, but it started during the pandemic, and it was a totally simulated Blaseball tournament or Blaseball sort of series. And all the teams were made up, all the players were made up, but they were all, it was almost like a horror game as well. So they'd give you a little text feed of how the game's playing out, and you'd have one player suddenly kidnapped or zapped by lightning, and then that player was just gone for the rest of the game. And then like all sorts of craziness and fan theories came out of it. And I love those sort of things where it just off the rails. Like you look at Twitch plays Pokemon, you look at like weird sort of like, I don't know, these weird things that don't really fit in the regular model of selling the game.
Yeah.
But that's why I usually have to be tempered back. And it's like, oh, we need to make sure we can actually make another game after this game. So let's pick something that we can sell.
And what was your kind of prior, you know, when you were growing up? I'm assuming you were a big gaming fan growing up. What was did you have a console of choice? Did you have particular games that you tended to veer towards?
Yeah, I mean, eventually I became a Halo bro, and I think that was like the sort of convergence with me and the rest of the world of like, okay, now I'm playing Halo every day and yelling at my friends about it. But,
did you have LAN parties?
Oh yeah, absolutely,
with it?
absolutely. Ball's energy drink was a big one at the time. And all these other stupid products that we felt like had to be thrown in there. But no, I actually started playing on PC, and I would play like the Command and Conquer series. That I think that was one of my favorite growing up. And I'm trying to think, like old DOS games I would play, and they're all sort of blanking on my mind right now. But yeah, computer games were always sort of my go-to.
How do you feel about because you saying old DOS games and that? I know I watch lots of sort of YouTubers talking about old PCs and DOS games. I built a Windows 98 PC, which is there for the purpose of doing that as such. How do you personally feel about sort of nostalgia of games and that? Is that something you participate in as such?
I mean, yes and no. Like I feel like sometimes you'll find like nostalgia communities that almost feel sort of trapped in the nostalgia a little bit. And I think even when you mentioned the Top Gun, that like I was sort of on the same page. It felt sort of trapped in its own nostalgia. But I guess actually it's being mentioned in the comments again too. But a good example of sort of like a mix between nostalgia and still for me like competitive fun and all that stuff is Age of Empires, which was a really big one for me back in the day. And Age of Empires 2 is still getting expansions or like getting new expansions now. And there's like tournaments being played around the world. And like, I just started watching like Age of Empires esports about a year ago, and I got hooked in it. I did, like this game's older than like most of the people I know and work with. And it's like, I mean, it's great. It's still very competitive. There's like a cool, fresh scene on it. So in that regard, I think, some games, like if they can keep updating, if they can find a way to sort of modernize maybe some of the weaker points that have evolved in the industry, I think those feel like gold.
Yeah.
Is there? I was just going to say, you just mentioned kind of that's an esports game now, which is mad. But is that an idea that's kind of being talked about within Mighty Yell about doing like an online multiplayer sort of game? Is that sort of idea crossed your minds?
We've kicked it around for sure. The difficulty is multiplayer on its own is a very big technical hurdle. I mean, for the 100 things that can go wrong making a regular game, like once you start hooking it up and having to test multiple machines every time you run it, and even like an upkeep cost of a multiplayer game is another issue. So it's something that's definitely in the back of our minds. Like we're definitely not cutting it out. And even looking at some semi-multiplayer things like Elden Ring's message system is a good example. It's not necessarily like real-time multiplayer competitions, but ways to sort of bring players within the same play space.
Yeah.
We're looking at stuff like that, but I think it'll be a while before we make like the next Counter-Strike or anything like that.
I'm glad you said what you said then, and I'm going to play that back to my sons because when I have the conflict of them shouting, "Dad, are you doing anything with the internet?" when they're playing a multiplayer online game, and I say to them, "Do you realise that it could be possibly in the game itself, and that you're playing on a server with 100 other people all across the world?" Right? So
it's nothing short of magic that online games work, and it's like even just the concept of lag. Like once you start reading up on the technicalities of how that works, and we fake a lot of it. It's like when you run and shoot in a game like Overwatch, I mean, there's a whole bunch of different things happening where your computer is sort of just guessing at what you're doing, and then a server somewhere on the other side of the world is also guessing, but that one's more important, and then you have to kind of catch. I don't know. It's crazy, chaos. Like it's just even 10 seconds of gameplay makes my head spin.
And I never really kind of understood all this until recently, because my internet, Matt will tell you, was awful before. It wasn't terrible, but it was very laggy, and I'm a PlayStation user, so if I'd be playing FIFA or Call of Duty and there was terrible lag. And it wasn't until recently, so we've had the internet upgraded, which is super fast now. We noticed the difference on here and so forth. But I was playing FIFA, and all of a sudden it's laggy again. I'm thinking, what is going on? And it weren't until I'd done a speed check. There was like on my phone, there was a section where it can see where there were problems.
Yep.
Clicked on that, and what was top? EA Sports.
Yeah.
And they were having server issues. So again, that then makes me realise why that was planned. It's nothing to do with my internet. It's the servers.
Yeah, and I mean, if you can imagine, like a router is still such a headache to figure out for like even all of us that deal with tech every day. Like the idea of like now being responsible for the games that run through that scares the living daylights out. So.
Well, before we wrap up our conversation and end the show with the anniversary spread, I'm keen to know kind of what. I'm sure you can't tell us everything what's going on in the background, because once you've released the latest project, I'm guessing the next phase is to get feedback, and if there's any bugs or anything like that need to be kind of looked into. But what's your kind of long term? Where's the plans for the company moving forward?
It's growth. It's like the first thing you do is you make one game at a time, and if you can get a hang of that, you start looking at can we get a little bigger and juggle two projects, or a bigger project. And I think that's what we're sort of looking at now, is what sort of other project, like we're doing a lot of sort of the R&D phase of like what sort of other things do we want to try, what sort of projects are worth investing a little bit of time researching and figuring out, like, is this something we want to do as a studio? Is this fun? And of course, is this something that we think we can either make a little money on, or get a publisher for, or sort of feeling out what's the next best up as a studio as well.
One question.
A fun little blue sky phase right now.
One question I had, which from stalking your LinkedIn page, it said that you had previously worked in pyrotechnics, and that is. Tell us more about what that was.
There was it was quite a while back now. There was a little stint I had where I was like, I'm going to try to see how many licenses I could get. So I ended up with like a motorcycle license, pyrotechnic license, scuba diving. I don't know. It was like I have to do something new, and I decided to do everything new.
Did you get ordained? Because so you can marry people and so on.
You know what? That was on the list, and I think sea captain was another way to get about
sea
that.
Captain.
Like then you can do it on international waters. But no, I never made it that far on that one. But yeah, the pyrotechnics. It was fun, but a lot of work for what it was. It's just a lot of hauling crates around and hauling, and everything has to be done slow because you don't want to blow yourself up.
And then it's over probably very quickly after you've spent all that time setting it up.
Oh yeah, and by then you're so tired. I mean, you're sleeping on the lawn while a fireworks show goes off, and it's like, oh yeah, we got to clean all this up now. So, but it was fun. I think those weird sort of odds and end jobs kind of give you a lot to pull from too. That one didn't.
Well,
but,
you need to work out how to incorporate a game based on pyrotechnics, and then you've come full circle, haven't you?
Yeah. I definitely think I could probably pitch something with bright colored explosions. I mean, I think I got an angle on that. So.
Well, while we're talking about fun things, to finish the show, George. Oh, no pressure. We know that as well as coming to watch us have interesting chats with guests like yourself, they also like to see how the guests handle the weekly
anniversary spread.
That's right. It's that time again. It's time for this week's anniversary spread. For those of you that are new joining us this evening and aren't aware of the game, well, there's 5 things that I'll be listing to George and to Matt this evening, or this afternoon if you're over in the States or in Canada, that are celebrating their anniversary today on the 6th of June. So this could be a film, it could be a song, it could be a game, hopefully, as we've got gaming experts on the show this evening. But I'll be going back and forth. So, George, you'll kick off with the first guess of what this thing is. Matt will then have his guess. Basically, you've got to get as close to the year as possible. That will accumulate over the 5. We'll swap around, and the winner will be the one closest to 0. No one's ever got 0. Is George going to be the first one? We don't know. We'll find out. So, let's kick off. The first one, George, is a film that's celebrating its anniversary today. I'm not going to tell you what year, that'll give it away. But the film is, annoyingly for you, it's one of Matt's favourites. But does he remember what year? It's the film Too Fast, Too Furious.
Oh, man. Okay.
Are you a fan of the film, by the way?
The first film was probably the most watched film in my... It was mostly because I had
nice.
But I loved it.
Yeah.
And that was 2001. And then they released, I think, every 2 years. So I'm going to guess 2003.
Okay.
For Too Fast, Too Furious.
The viewers, get your guesses in as well. Shane says, spread them, boys. It's time for anniversary spread. We've got 2017, Shane's saying. Highland G, 2002. But you're saying 2003, George, yeah?
I'm going to go with that, yeah.
Okay. Matt, have you heard of the film?
I have, and I've watched it several times. In the UK, George, it is pretty much you're guaranteed if you turn on the TV at sort of one of the remote channels about this time at night, there is probably a Fast and Furious film on. And quite often, Too Fast, Too Furious. I would say 2002, personally.
Okay.
Love it. I really like Too Fast, Too Furious as well.
I think the first 3 I adored, and I probably got a speeding ticket or 2 in my Honda Civic because of those movies.
Did you have neons underneath it?
I didn't, but I did buy aftermarket speakers so I could feel cool without really knowing anything. Yeah.
Nice. I can reveal that one of you has had a direct hit. Too Fast, Too Furious was released on, or in, 2003. Well done,
Ooh.
George. So George starts off with a direct hit. Matt, you're on +1. We move on to the second. And Matt, you'll be going first on this one. Another great film, by the way. Annoyingly, I think, Matt, you'll definitely know it because you're older than us. But the film is Con Air. Con Air. Both deep in thought here. I can see the cogs are turning. Matt's working out what birthday.
I'm going to
was
say
that?
1996 for that.
Okay. You like the film, Matt?
I do. It's got that wonderful scene with Nicolas Cage where his hair's blowing in the wind. And
Does it bring back memories?
Oh, yeah, those days when it used to blow in the wind. Probably around 1996. Yeah.
Okay, George, you know the film?
Yeah, I do. I was born in right now 1990, so I'm trying to remember if this was something my parents let me see or not as a gauge.
We've got a few guesses. I don't know if you can see the comments, but Shane from Dawn of Comics 96, Highland G says 95. Shane says best Nick Cage movie ever. It's up there. Now, by all means, George, you can have a wild stab at it, or you can play it safe. Go close to Matt's guess. It's in, play how you feel best.
I want to say 95, but I'm going to go 94 just to throw it off a little.
Okay. I can reveal that Con Air, starring Nicolas Cage and some other people, 1997. So, well, Matt, you were 1 out, so you're up to +2. Sadly for you, George, you were 3 out, so you've now gone behind on this one. Matt's winning by 1, but still very tight. Only 1 in it, and low scores as well. We move back to you, George, and we've got a song that is celebrating this anniversary today. The song Last Friday Night by Katy Perry.
Okay, so we're talking 2000s.
You know this song, Matt?
Yeah.
Is it one of your favourites? One of your go-tos? No? Do you like Katy Perry? Do either of you like Katy Perry?
Like I've heard it enough. I've never been like, oh no, this is Katy Perry.
No.
I can't stand this. But,
She's good at what she does in terms of pop music.
So a couple of guesses. 2010 from Highland G, but he says no idea. Shane, 2012.
Just to give some confidence in
No
the
idea.
answer.
I was thinking like 2010, 11. I'm
Okay.
gonna go 2011.
Okay. Matt?
Again, purely a guess. I think it's a fairly recent song.
Okay.
But I may be wrong. I'm going to say 2013 for my guess.
Okay. Quite close again with the guesses. I can reveal that Last Friday Night by Katy Perry was released in 2011. Another direct hit for George. Is he a master of the anniversary spread? I don't know. You stay on +3. Matt, you were 2 out, so you go back on ahead behind as such on +4. So still only 1 in it, but it's switching each round at this moment in time.
I think what it is because George is obviously very technical in his role. He's worked out how to get the answers without looking like he's getting the answers.
I can keep my hands up if it helps here. I got the memory of a goldfish too, so no pressure if I
Amazing.
take the crown here.
Well, it's very tight. And now, one that you'll both be pleased about is a game that's celebrating an
Well, it
anniversary?
depends
Is
on
it
the
one that you
game.
know? Hopefully. Matt, you're going first. The game is Dirt 4. Dirt 4.
I'm getting a pure guess. I know the game. Well, I know the series, but I think Dirt 4 would be around 2018 is my rough guess for that.
Okay. George, have you played the game?
I haven't, but I can sort of picture in my head what the game looked like graphics wise, where it was sort of at. And I'm trying to date it based on that.
Yeah, it's a good game actually. I think me and my son have played it.
2018. So I'm gonna go. I think I want to say earlier. I want to say like 2016 on this,
Okay.
and to keep that one year gap for us.
Okay, I can reveal that Dirt 4 was released in 2017. You were both one out either way, so the scores move up. George, you're on +4. Matt, you were on +5. Now, George, what that means is because you're currently winning, because you're closer to 0, that means you have to go first on the final round, because then Matt knows what he's having to play with. But Matt, you only need to be 2 either side of whatever George's guess is. So this is a key round now.
I'm sweating, by the way. My palms.
Tension is real, guys. The tension is
It
real.
is really funny with this because it is just a bit of fun, but as soon as we start, it does get a bit sort of
Yeah,
pressured.
and we've now got over 1,000 people watching us live just for the anniversary
No, we
spread.
haven't.
So the last one I can reveal is also a game. And it's not one that Matt, you're going to be happy because it's not one that's kind of got a random,
Ridiculous. Yeah.
ridiculous name, but it will get you thinking. The game, George, you're guessing first. Pac-Man Championship Edition.
Oh, damn.
Can't reveal the console.
No. It feels like I remember Xbox having a lot of like just goofy stuff like this, or Xbox 360.
Shane from Donna Comics says 1993. Wow.
Mm.
Can't remember how old Shane would have been then. Probably early 20s. Shane, correct me if I'm wrong.
I graduated 2008. I'm gonna go. This is a tough one. I'm gonna go 2010 on this.
Okay. Matt, let's move it over to you. What are your thoughts, Matt?
My thoughts is taking a massive risk with this, and my thinking behind it is if it's called Championship Edition, is it that it was around the time where people used to competitively play Pac-Man, so that's why it's Championship Edition, and was it referencing people playing it on the arcade, so it would have been on an Atari or something like that.
Okay.
So I am good.
Sorry, Matt. I'm just going to remind you, if you want to win this, you only need to be 2 either side. I'm just saying.
No, I'm just putting that to the side, and I'm going to say 1983 is what I'm going to say, and probably ruin all chances of winning completely with this. Because I like your thinking, George. I remember around. Like I said, they're all those like compilations of whatever games, weren't there? On the
I'm thinking like, is this something we collected achievements in? Like Xbox
maybe.
achievements.
Okay, I can reveal Pac-Man Championship Edition was released in 2007. Great guess, George. You were 3 out and you move on to +7. Matt, you were 24 out.
Go for
Amazing.
broke.
Which takes you up to
Why not?
I mean, what you could have done there, even if you thought it was early, you could have just gone to 2009.
2006 or whatever it may be.
Would have won.
Yeah,
But
that's no fun.
No, I appreciate the
I applied some logic to my
if I play again, I'm going to be intimidated by this. With playing all the future games.
It would have been amazing if it was 1983 and it just blitzed the game. But, hey, congratulations to George, who is this week's winner of the anniversary spread. Well done, George. Let's have a cheer for George. Anyone? Come on. You don't have to do a speech. It's fine. We will wrap up now, George. Thank you so much again for joining me and Matt this evening. Appreciate the time difference and so forth. So back to work for you afterwards, I think you said.
Yep.
Where can our viewers and our listeners find your game library?
So the Big Con, our 2D 90s game, that's on Steam, that's on consoles like Xbox, and actually recently Game Pass. So if you have Game Pass, you can grab it for free.
Oh wow!
Right now, which is pretty good. A Night in the Attic, that's going to be on VR headsets. So that's Oculus Quest 2, up the whole ladder there, and on Steam. So even if you have a different headset, you can pick it up there.
Amazing. And whereabouts is it just at Mighty Yell on social media?
I think so. I think if somebody from Mighty Yell's in the chat, they can maybe dump it there so I don't mess that one up. But I'm pretty sure. Yeah, if you look up Mighty Yell Studios, we're definitely.
We've copied in below this video. If you're watching this on YouTube, it is all included in the description. And also, if you're listening to this on one of the streaming platforms, again, I've included all the links so you can find it on there.
Yeah, do go and check them out. Do go and check out the games. I did see a comment. I think it was Highland G earlier. He said he's just seen that it's available at a really
on
good
Switch. I think, yeah.
So,
I cannot speak. I cannot speak highly enough about the Big Con. I absolutely loved it, and the only reason I haven't played Night in the Attic is I haven't got a VR headset. So
if anyone wants to buy that one,
let me know.
Give you the address.
And we made it for beginners. I mean, it was for people who haven't done VR a lot yet. So once you buy it, we're front runners.
I'll be sort of like this, playing it.
Well, as I said, George, it's been an absolute pleasure. Stick around after and we'll say goodbye to you off air as well. But thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. Much appreciated. Taking time out to come and watch us do our thing. We'll be back next week with Highland G. We look forward to seeing you then. Have a great week and we'll speak to you soon.
Hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe on your favorite service. Past and future episodes can be found on all major streaming platforms, including Amazon, Apple, Google, Spotify, and YouTube. You can also contact James and Matt via Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. They will return in the next This Week in Metropolis.